Hey everybody and welcome back to Berd Predicts NFL Week 4. So last week I was 11 and 5, which brings my total up to 31 and 17, which I'm pretty happy with. I got the same record last week as I did the week before, so I am pretty happy with that. I haven't had a losing record week so far, which I'm pretty happy with, and I hope that continues. So it is week 4 of the NFL, kind of getting into more seeing how these teams or seasons are going to play out, and there's some pretty interesting matchups this week, so let's get into it. Oh yeah, and by the way, sorry if I sound weird because my throat is not feeling great. So yeah. Anyways, let's start off our week with Thursday Night Football, Lions versus Packers. Now, this should be an interesting game. They're both 2-1 teams to start off this week. A battle for NFC North dominance, and it should be good, but I am going to take the Detroit Lions winning against the Packers. They have a much better defense, with Aiden Hutchinson and Alex Anzalone both having pretty good seasons so far, and their offense doesn't look too bad as well. The Packers. Let's see. The Packers did have a very close victory against the New Orleans Saints. They came back from a 17-point deficit to win at home. But they did not look great in that game, and I do think the Lions are going to win. Next up, the Falcons versus the Jaguars. The first international game of the season is going to be played in London, and it's also going to be broadcast on Disney Plus with like some sort of Toy Story theme sort of thing going on. I don't know how they're going to do that, but it might be interesting to watch. Anyway, the Falcons coming off of their first loss of the season against the Lions, they did very much look like frauds in that game. Couldn't get much going offensively. The Jaguars, meanwhile, had a very surprising loss against the Houston Texans. C.J. Stroud had a monster game, and Trevor Lawrence did not. That being said, I know I'm riding the Jaguars right now, but I am going to take the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are a better team, in my opinion, than the Atlanta Falcons, and they always seem to win at London. Next up is my game of the week. Yeah, very early for my game of the week, but it is the division matchup between the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills. This game should be great. Both these teams had blowouts. The Dolphins, especially, winning by 50 points. Against the Denver Broncos, scoring 70 points all on offense. That is just absolutely insane. Yeah, their offense looked Super Bowl caliber. Tua Tagovailoa looked like the quarterback he was promised to be back in 2019 or 2020. I can't remember when he was drafted. I think it was 2020. But anyway, yeah, both of these teams look very good. That being said, I'm going to take the Miami Dolphins. They look way too good right now. They look absolutely insane. And the Bills do look good, but we can see that they do struggle, as evidenced by the Week 1 game, and I'm going to take the Dolphins here. Next up, a matchup between two 0-3 teams, the Vikings and the Panthers. The Vikings coming off of a very embarrassing loss against the Los Angeles Chargers. They had the ball in the red zone and they couldn't capitalize. Kirk Cousins threw a pick, and the Chargers ended up winning. Meanwhile, the Panthers sat out Bryce Young against the Seahawks. Andy Dalton did not look good for the Panthers, and they lost to Seattle. This team is not good, or this game is not going to be great, but I am taking the Minnesota Vikings winning against the Panthers. I think they're clearly a better team. They just make a lot of mistakes, and in the end, they are going to win against the Carolina Panthers, in my opinion. Next up, another matchup between the 0-3 teams, the Denver Broncos versus the Chicago Bears. Good lord, this game is going to be awful. The Broncos lost by 50. Not much else needs to be said about that game that hasn't been said already. The Broncos look absolutely terrible, and I don't even know if Never mind. Anyway, the Chicago Bears also lost to a blowout, not as bad as the Broncos, but they still lost to a blowout against the Kansas City Chiefs. While I would take the Bears here, based on their performance in Week 4, I do think that they are still a worse team than the Denver Broncos. I think the Broncos are going to get it back together and defeat the Chicago Bears. Let's see. So, next up we have the Baltimore Ravens against the Cleveland Browns. Now, this should be a very interesting game. Both teams are 2-1, looking for the top spot in the AFC North. Well, I guess there's also the Steelers, but looking for at least the top 2 spot in the AFC North. The Ravens coming off of a very disappointing loss against the Indianapolis Colts. It went to overtime. Justin Tucker couldn't make the game-winning field goal, and it ended with the Colts winning in overtime. Meanwhile, the Browns had a very convincing game against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans just absolutely looked god-awful that day, and the Browns' offense looked pretty solid, not to mention their defense. It is going to be a tough one to predict, but I am going to go with Cleveland winning this one. I think Cleveland looks like a very impressive team. I think they've looked better than they have in years. And I think they're going to defeat the Ravens. Next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Tennessee Titans. No, not the Tennessee Titans, the Houston Texans. I'm sorry. This game looks like it's going to be a clear victory for the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I am going to take them. However, the Texans look like pretty solid underdogs. I mean, C.J. Stroud had a career game last week against the Jaguars defense, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a close game, but I do think the Steelers are going to barely just edge it out against the Houston Texans. Next up, the L.A. Rams versus the Indianapolis Colts. This game doesn't seem... I don't think it's going to be as bad as it looks on paper. Both teams do look very gritty, and they look pretty solid for how their roster looks. The Rams came off of a close loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Rams look pretty good. I mean, they don't look like super great or anything, but I do think they could be a sleeper favorite for the wild card. The Colts, meanwhile, coming off a surprising victory against the Baltimore Ravens. Gardner Minshew leading the Indianapolis Colts to victory. Michael Pittman having a pretty good game. And overall, the Colts not looking terrible. They do have a winning record, and they are on top of the AFC South at the moment. I think this is going to be a tough game to predict, but I am going to go with the LA Rams on this one. I do think that the LA Rams are tougher than most people are willing to admit, and I do think they're going to slightly beat the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means, but I do think they're going to beat the Indianapolis Colts. Next up is a battle for NFC South supremacy between the Buccaneers and the Saints. The Buccaneers coming off of their first loss of the season against the Philadelphia Eagles, whom are a much better team. And I put it as my game of the week, but it was not much of a game. The Eagles just looked better on all fronts. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints blowing a 17-point loss against the Green Bay Packers for their first loss of the season. So both teams are now 2-1. This is going to be a tough game to predict. But the Saints don't have Derek Carr this week. So I will go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning this one. Next up, we have the Washington Commanders versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Commanders took their first loss of the season against the Buffalo Bills, who absolutely destroyed them on all facets of the game. The Eagles, meanwhile, had a pretty convincing victory against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I do think that the Eagles are going to continue to stay undefeated. They are going to defeat the Washington Commanders. Let's see. So the next game is the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, this game looks pretty interesting. Both teams are 1-2, and the Bengals got their first win of the season last week against the Los Angeles Rams, which granted aren't the best team ever, but they're not necessarily a bad team. The Titans, meanwhile, lost by 24 to the Cleveland Browns. They don't look good. Ryan Tannehill looks washed, and I do think the Bengals are going to pretty handily defeat the Tennessee Titans. Next up, the Las Vegas Raiders against the I was about to say San Diego Chargers, the Los Angeles Chargers. The Raiders came off of a loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I did think that they were going to win because they usually win at home against them, but I mean, they're in a new stadium. They're not in Oco anymore, so that might have been an effect of it, but they lost to Jimmy Garoppolo, at least for this game. I don't know who they're going to start. I don't know. Do they still have Mariota? I'm not sure. But anyway, the Chargers got their first win of the season against the Minnesota Vikings in a very close matchup. And I think Justin Herbert still looks like a very good quarterback. And I do think the Chargers are going to defeat their division rival in the Las Vegas Raiders. Next up is going to be my upset of the week. I am going to take the New England Patriots defeating the Dallas Cowboys. 2 weeks ago, this might have looked like a solid win for the Dallas Cowboys, but they absolutely wrecked themselves against the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, if the Arizona Cardinals can put off a victory like that against the Dallas Cowboys, I don't see how the New England Patriots can't do that against them. The Pats did have their first win of the season against I know I keep saying first win or first loss of the season, against the New York Jets. Granted, the Jets don't look good at all without Aaron Rodgers, but still, I think the Pats are a scrappy team, and I do think they're going to slightly beat the Dallas Cowboys. Next up, the Arizona Cardinals against the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think I need to elaborate on this game. The Niners are going to beat the Cardinals. Granted, the Cardinals did pull off an upset last week against the Cowboys, but the Niners are just too good on all sides of the ball, and I do think they're going to pretty handily beat the Cardinals. Next up, Sunday Night Football, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the New York Jets. This should be another clear winner. The Chiefs are going to defeat the Jets. The Jets look like an absolutely terrible team without Aaron Rodgers. They were holding in there against the New England Patriots, but their defense can't bail them out from everything. Their offense looks absolutely dysfunctional without Aaron Rodgers at the helm. Zach Wilson looks like an absolute bust. And if they don't find a new quarterback, this team is probably going to continue to lose. I am picking the Chiefs here. And finally, our Monday night game, the Seattle Seahawks versus the New York Giants. The Seahawks defeated the Panthers in a pretty good victory against them. The Panthers don't look like a great team. Kenneth Walker had a good game, and they look like an alright team. The Giants, meanwhile, did have a loss against the Niners. They did not have Saquon Barkley or Andrew Thomas, I believe, so that did hinder them a lot, and I don't know if those two players are going to come back. So with that being said, I'm taking the Seattle Seahawks. I do think that they are a better team than the New York Giants. And that is it for my Week 4 predictions. Sorry I didn't have much to say about these games, but that's sometimes how it goes, you know? Anyway, I hope you guys had a good time watching this. I'm probably the most boring person to listen to, but, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.